Nintendo. Nin-fucking-tendo, man.
Nintendo! Nintendo games!
Nintendo's making a second comeback. People are talking about them once again, and I want to throw my voice in the ring this time. Parallel to all the acclaim, Nintendo has faced all sorts of criticism, and it all came to a climax with the Wii U. I will be the last to say much of it was not deserved, let alone foreseeable, but it seems like a lot of gamers have let all the bad things about them eclipse all the good things about them. I've read too many comments and articles at this point like, Nintendo sucks, and Nintendo's for kids, and Nintendo should just go third party, to stand idly by any longer. I'm gonna explain why despite all their bullshit, and there is bullshit, but despite it, Nintendo is still fucking awesome. Before I do though, I'd like to point out that I can already hear the torches being lit in the bowels of your parents' basement, because some of you are just dying to call me a fanboy.
You give us a second!
That word has been corrupted, and there are two things you should know.
Where did you get that money?
A fanboy is someone who likes one or two things obsessively and talks shit about everything else. And you know what, there are too many great games out there to live like that. My favorite game isn't even a Nintendo IP. I mean, I love all kinds of games. PlayStation, Steam. I don't give a shit about platform, I just care about games. The fact that you need different platforms to play certain games, that's just something we have to deal with right now, but personally, I can't wait for the day capitalism crumbles and companies evolve into collectives that instead of competing with different consoles can collaborate on one console that will host all the games of its generation. But until that dream materializes, I'll always have a place on my shelf for two consoles. A fanboy also has unwavering loyalty to the thing they like regardless of any of its flaws. And this brings me to the point that even though I love Nintendo, sometimes I fucking hate Nintendo. I hate their YouTube policies, I hate their fan game policies, I hate their emulator policies, I hate their lawyers, I hated the region locking, I hate the underpowered hardware, I hate their lack of third-party support, I hate how they neglect their own franchises, I hate how they waste resources on spin-offs instead of mainline installments. I hated the gimmicks, and I hate the fact that all these bad decisions are made by an inner circle of fiscally conservative Japanese businessmen. I mean, fuck, at the end of the day, they're a multinational corporation that only wants our money. Yet at the other end of a very long road filled with good times that leads up to the Switch, they come out on top. So, if you're so frustrated by their corporate bullshit that you're willing to boycott them, then by all means enjoy your Xbox. But if you're still here, wondering, hey, when the hell is this guy gonna get to defending them?
Wait for it. Here it comes. Almost there.
In the video game industry, so many companies have come and gone, flowered and floundered, but Nintendo has been the most resilient, the most celebrated, and the most important. Not just because they've survived longer than any other company, and not even just because of the cultural impact of icons like Mario and Pokemon, but most of all because of their contributions. No single company has contributed to the industry as much as them. That's not so unbelievable, considering Microsoft is primarily a computer business and Sony has several ventures in electronics. But Nintendo has always been about video games. Well, first they were about cards for 60 years, and then they went crazy entrepreneurial for a while. But it was the 70s. But then, they were all about video games. And they got in the game early. And I'm not saying the others haven't contributed at all. Sony ushered in the third dimension and CDs and multimedia. And while I totally resent them for it, Microsoft took gaming online. Not to mention the hundreds of developers that broke different grounds with now classic games. But each one of these movers and shakers have a soft spot for Nintendo, and have taken at least one page out of their book. Just look at the modern gamepad. It's funny how people say Nintendo prefers gimmicky controls over a standard controller when in fact they invented nearly everything on the standard controller. The D-pad? Nintendo. The face buttons? Nintendo. Bumpers? Nintendo. Triggers? Sony. But the analog stick? Nintendo. Imagine playing every game with tank controls until another company had their vision. Rumble? Nintendo. Motion controls? I never liked them, but hey, Nintendo. Touchscreens before smart devices, but after those PDAs only yuppie douchebags had in the late 90s? Nintendo. These are the guys that experimented with virtual reality 20 years before it was just starting to be okay. Despite their usually underpowered hardware, they are in many ways ahead of their time, which is why so many of their contributions have become standards. Their level of innovation is vulnerable to the occasional flop, but don't let their mistakes overshadow their success. They've had way more successes than they've had failures. There are things they pioneered that are so integral to gaming that they're naturally taken for granted. The original Legend of Zelda was the first game to save your progress. Ocarina of Time introduced lock-on targeting, a mechanic adopted by just about fucking everyone. Super Mario 64 literally defined how 3D games are controlled. Platforming, side-scrolling, open world, multiplayer ports, camera control, portability, reviving a dead industry, and making it accessible to everyone. The list goes on. However, all these standards they laid down were merely the bedrock revolved around their core mission: to create video games, and that is their greatest contribution: quality. Kids poking around the virtual console today like it's some kind of digital garage sale cannot possibly understand how revolutionary the Nintendo Entertainment System was back then. Before the NES, video games were rudimentary, bite-sized experiences developed primarily for arcades, and the oversaturated home consoles were primitive instruments for bad ports and shovelware. We all know what happened next. Video games almost withered away into another 80s novelty. But then, Super Mario Bros. Came out and blew the doors down. This game was fun, colorful, challenging, charming, cohesive, and most importantly, it was complete. It had characters, setting, and a plot. It had enemies, items, and music. It had 8 worlds, each with 4 levels. That's 32 fucking levels! That was a lot back when the last AAA game to come before it was fucking Marble Madness. This game was the medium's first fully realized project. And that was only the beginning. For over 30 years now, Nintendo has pumped out masterpiece after masterpiece, setting countless standards in game design. Even on their least successful consoles, they've created some of the best games ever. So to say the NES resurrected the gaming industry is an understatement. It was a dead pigeon, rising from the ashes like a phoenix and evolving into an aerodactyl. And to cast off Nintendo as irrelevant is to pull the ripcord of the skeleton. Every game you play to this day has Nintendo DNA in its genetic code. We're all gamers because of them. Even if you never played their games, that's how deep their influence runs. Nintendo was the first to recognize video games as an art form the way Charlie Chaplin recognized film, and they took it to the world as explosively as the Beatles took popular music. There was a point in time when the word Nintendo was synonymous with the word video game. That time won't come again, but it doesn't have to. Nintendo's dying breath is light years away. They are the gatekeepers of the industry and the architects of its infrastructure. Not so long ago, like many of you, I was afraid they would meet the same doom that met Sega and Atari. We all had one demand: modernize. Now, with the Switch, Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, 2 Metroids, 2K Sports, Bethesda, Rockstar, and shit we don't even know about yet, it seems they're finally starting to listen.